The ultra-wealthy have a strategy for never paying taxes on their investment gains, and it's called buy, borrow, die, and it's completely legal. I'm Max of Monkey Money, and today we're breaking down exactly how it works, why it's designed for people who already have millions, and what the rest of us can actually learn from it. Let's start with the fundamental problem this strategy solves. In the United States, you don't owe taxes on investment gains until you sell the asset. An asset can grow from $1 to $1 million, and as long as you hold it, the IRS isn't getting anything. The moment you sell, the clock starts. If you've held the asset for more than a year, you owe long-term capital gains tax, which for high earners can reach 20% or more depending on your state. So a billionaire sitting on $100 million in appreciated stock faces a significant tax event the moment they try to use that wealth. The buy, borrow, die strategy is the answer to that problem, and it has three parts. The first part is the one most people already understand: buy. Wealthy individuals accumulate appreciating assets, stocks, real estate, private businesses. These assets grow in value over time without triggering a tax event because you haven't sold anything. The key insight is that the asset is simultaneously growing in value and serving as collateral for borrowing. As the portfolio grows, the borrowing capacity grows with it. The asset is working in two directions at once, generating returns and enabling access to capital. The second part is where the strategy gets genuinely sophisticated: borrow. Instead of selling assets to fund their lifestyle, wealthy individuals take out loans using those assets as collateral. The most common vehicle is called a securities-based line of credit, or SBLOC. Here's the math that makes this compelling. If a wealthy investor sells $10 million in stock to buy a yacht, they might owe $2 million or more in capital gains taxes. If they instead take a securities-based line of credit at 4% interest, they pay approximately $400,000 in interest that year, but the full $10 million stays invested. If the underlying stock grows at 7% annually, the portfolio gains $700,000 while the interest costs $400,000. They've effectively paid for the yacht and come out $300,000 ahead, all without triggering a single dollar in capital gains tax. The loan proceeds are not income. The IRS does not tax borrowed money. This is the core mechanism. Use the appreciating asset as collateral, borrow against it at low interest, live off the loan proceeds, and let the asset keep compounding. The loan gets repaid eventually, but never through selling the asset and never through triggering a taxable event. Private equity investors and business owners pledge ownership stakes as collateral for lines of credit that fund operations or personal expenses. The common thread is always the same. Use the appreciating asset as collateral, access capital through debt rather than liquidation, and let the underlying asset continue compounding. The key variable is whether the interest rate on the loan is lower than the expected rate of return on the underlying asset. When it is, borrowing is mathematically superior to selling. It's a permanent deferral machine. Here is the banana version of this because the concept is abstract and the analogy makes it concrete. Imagine you have a banana tree that grows 7 bananas for every 100 on it each year. Under the normal approach, every time you want to eat, you pick bananas from the tree and pay a tax on what you pick. Under the buy, borrow, die approach, you go to the bank, tell them your tree is worth 10,000 bananas, and borrow 400 bananas per year at low interest. The tree keeps growing. You keep eating. The IRS never gets involved because you never picked a single taxable banana. The math works as long as the tree grows faster than the interest rate on the loan. This brings us to one of the most important financial distinctions that almost never gets taught explicitly: the difference between consumer debt and asset-backed debt. Consumer debt is used to pull future labor into the present. You borrow to buy a car, a vacation, a piece of furniture, you're committing future income to pay for present consumption. Asset-backed debt works completely differently. You borrow against something you already own that's generating returns. The underlying asset remains untouched, continuing to compound, while the loan provides liquidity without triggering a tax event. Consumer debt creates a treadmill. You have to work harder tomorrow to pay for what you used yesterday. The largest liabilities are car loans, credit card balances, and student debt, all of which are secured by depreciating assets or future income. The entire structure is designed around consuming income rather than accumulating assets that could be pledged as collateral. Breaking out of that structure doesn't happen through earning more. It happens through redirecting income from consumption to asset accumulation over a sustained period of time until the asset base is large enough to access a different tier of borrowing. Asset-backed debt keeps the money machine running while giving you access to cash. One is a trap, the other is a tool. The system is designed to give most people access to only one of them. And this is where the strategy reveals something uncomfortable about how the financial system actually works. Banks will offer securities-based lines of credit and similar asset-backed lending instruments at favorable interest rates, typically 3% to 6%, but only to borrowers with substantial collateral. Most lenders require a minimum of $1 million to $5 million in liquid pledgeable assets before they'll even have the conversation. Below that threshold, the lending system looks completely different. Credit cards charge 18% to 26% interest. Auto loans run 7% to 12%. Personal loans cost 10% to 20%. The people who need credit the most pay the most for it. The people who need it least pay the least. This is not a coincidence. It reflects a structural reality of the lending system. Debt is cheapest for those with the most assets to pledge as collateral. The buy, borrow, die strategy is effectively a moat. Below a certain level of wealth, you don't have access to it. Above it, the advantages compound. It's worth noting that the step-up in basis has been a target for legislative reform multiple times. The Biden administration proposed eliminating or modifying it. Various tax reform proposals over the years have suggested replacing it with a carryover basis system, where heirs would inherit the original cost basis rather than the stepped-up one. None of these proposals have passed into law as of 2026, but the political attention reflects how significant the tax benefit is at the scale where it matters most. The strategy works under current law. Anyone using it at a sophisticated level almost certainly has legal counsel monitoring legislative developments that could affect it. For the purposes of understanding how the system works, the step-up in basis is currently in effect and represents one of the most significant intergenerational wealth transfer mechanisms in the tax code. If you've made it this far, hit those like and subscribe buttons. It genuinely helps us keep making content like this. Now for the third part of the strategy, and the one that makes the whole cycle complete, die. This sounds morbid, but it's actually the legal mechanism that seals the entire tax avoidance structure. Under current U.S. tax law, when you die and pass assets to your heirs, something called a step-up in basis occurs. Here's what that means in practice. If you bought stock for $1 and it grew to $100 over your lifetime, you technically have a $99 unrealized gain. If you sell it, you owe tax on that $99. But when you die, the cost basis for your heirs automatically resets to the current market value, which in this example is $100. The $99 in gains simply evaporates for tax purposes. Your heirs inherit the stock at a $100 basis. If they sell it immediately, they owe no capital gains tax. Here's how the complete cycle works. The wealthy individual accumulates assets throughout their life, borrows against them to fund their lifestyle, and never sells. At death, The step up in basis resets all the deferred gains. The heirs sell a small portion of the now tax-free assets to repay any outstanding loans. The remainder passes to them free of capital gains that would have been owed under any other approach. And then the heirs can restart the cycle. Buy, borrow, die. This is not tax evasion. It's tax avoidance, and it's entirely legal. The strategy has existed in the tax code for decades and has survived multiple legislative attempts to close it. Understanding it is not about endorsing it. It's about understanding how the system actually works. The second banana moment is about the step up in basis, specifically. Imagine your banana tree has been quietly growing for 40 years. You borrowed against it every time you needed bananas, never actually picking from the tree itself, and the tree is now enormous. Under normal rules, if you cut down the tree and cashed out, you'd owe taxes on every banana it produced since year one. But under the step-up rule, when you pass the tree to your children, the IRS officially declares that the tree has always been this big. The decades of growth simply stop existing for tax purposes. The children can now pick bananas, sell the tree, or borrow against it just like you did, with a clean slate. Understanding buy, borrow, die also clarifies why regular consumer debt functions so differently. When an average person borrows to buy a car, they're borrowing against future income, income they haven't earned yet, income that will be taxed before it arrives, and income that will be used to pay for something that's losing value from the moment they drive it off the lot. The debt isn't secured by an appreciating asset. It's secured by the future labor of the borrower. The interest rate reflects this. Lenders charge more because the collateral is less reliable. A depreciating car is worse collateral than an appreciating stock portfolio. The borrower pays more in both interest rate and opportunity cost for access to capital that gives them less. This is the structural divide that buy, borrow, die makes visible. Two people can both borrow money in the same week. One pays 22% and depletes their future earnings to fund present consumption. The other pays 4% and keeps their assets compounding while accessing liquidity tax-free. Same economy, same tax code. Completely different systems depending on which side of the asset threshold you sit on. There's also a compounding dynamic to the moat that most people don't fully appreciate. The wealthy don't just pay less for capital. They pay less while their capital continues growing. The average borrower pays more for capital while their assets lose value. At 22% credit card interest, a $10,000 balance costs $2,200 per year just to stand still. At 4% asset-backed interest, a $10,000 loan costs $400 per year, while the underlying collateral may be growing at 7%, producing a net gain. The first borrower is running backward. The second is running forward. Both are borrowing. The structural difference in outcome is enormous, and it compounds every single year. So what's the practical takeaway for someone who doesn't have $5 million in a brokerage account? The honest answer is that the full buy, borrow, die strategy isn't accessible without substantial assets. The barrier is structural and real. But the principles it illustrates are worth internalizing, even if the exact mechanics aren't available to you yet. First, assets that appreciate are fundamentally different from assets that depreciate. Every dollar you redirect from depreciating liabilities toward appreciating assets moves you incrementally toward the side of the line where better financial tools become available. Index funds, real estate, ownership stakes in businesses. These are the building blocks of the system that generates the collateral base the strategy requires. There's a fourth principle worth naming that most financial education skips entirely. The buy, borrow, die strategy is partly possible because of how liquid and stable the underlying assets are. Index funds and blue-chip stocks are accepted as collateral precisely because their value is reliably accessible and relatively stable over time. This means that building toward even a modest version of asset-backed borrowing requires accumulating the right kind of assets: diversified, liquid, appreciating, not speculative bets, not concentrated single stock positions, not illiquid real estate with complicated title situations. The discipline of building the right asset base is the prerequisite for everything else in this strategy, and it starts well before $1 million. Second, tax deferral is a genuine financial advantage, even at smaller scales. Maxing out a Roth IRA, contributing to a 401k, holding index funds in a taxable account rather than trading frequently. All of these delay or reduce the tax drag on compounding returns. The buy, borrow, die strategy is the extreme version of a principle that applies at every level of wealth. Third, understanding the system is not the same as being able to use it, but it changes how you think about money. The ultra-wealthy don't treat wealth as income. They treat it as assets that generate access to capital. Shifting even partially toward that mindset, even at much smaller scales, changes the financial decisions you make. The buy, borrow, die strategy is a window into how the financial system is actually structured for those at the top of it. It's legal, it's documented, and it's one of the primary mechanisms through which wealth compounds across generations without the tax drag that erodes returns for everyone else. Understanding it doesn't fix the structural inequality it represents, but it does explain something important about why the gap between generations of wealth and generations of earned income keeps widening. Drop a comment and tell me, did you know about the step up in basis before today? If this video helped you understand how the system works at the level most people never see, subscribe to Monkey Money. Every week we break down the financial mechanics that explain the world as it actually is. See you next video.